Welcome to Bedtime Whispers, where darkness comes to life and nightmares become reality. I was pickily reviewing the merchandise on the counter. A new arrival was coming soon, and I needed to sort through the items in stock and save some for the weekly sale. Of course, it was not my dream to work in a clothing store and get a small salary. But life is life. You have to do something. I got married early, which I soon regretted. At 25, I had an unloved man and a lost youth. I had a lack of higher education. I was lost in this life. Tell me, what prevents you from doing what you want to do in this life? I will answer. I am hindered by reality. My mother is sick with cancer, and we spend all our savings to cure her, but rather to keep her more or less normal. I was distracted from my sorrowful thoughts by a young trainee Liaska, Marish, and it's already time. When do we close? Nice girl, this Lucy. Kind eyes, good-natured, all pity stray cats and feeding sausages. That's it. Get ready. I put all the old stuff for sale and began to turn off all appliances in the store. Leaving lights on or anything else could have cost me more than half of my modest salary. We were on our way with Lucia. We were walking and, as usual, discussing unfair bosses, at times jumping to the subject of man. Then she had to turn on another street, and we said goodbye, and I went on my own. It was late, and it was getting dark, but no one thought to turn on the street lights. The windows of the apartment buildings were lit like fireflies. I heard a car driving behind me and stepped off the road. As I had often been run over by drunk drivers in my life. Abruptly, the car hit the brakes and stopped slightly in front of me, and immediately backed up and was level with me. The driver opened the door, and I saw a handsome young guy. He smiled at me luxuriously and said in a pleasant voice, "Good evening, beautiful girl. Can I give you a ride?" There was so much nonchalance in his voice that I had no doubts about his intentions. So I just shook my head and walked on. I would never get into a car with a stranger. The guy wasn't the least bit surprised by my refusal and shouted after me, "Then we'll meet you tomorrow at this time." Closed the door and drove off. Quickly, I didn't pay any attention to his words and quietly continued on my way. At home, my unloved husband, a cat Mickey, and a hot supper were waiting for me. My husband, Kirill, was a mediocre cook, and he was the only one who did all the cooking in the house, though more often than not, he just brought food from the restaurant where he worked. To give you a better understanding of my situation, I will say that Kirill is a very peculiar person, hysterical, jealous, and somewhat superficial. Our family life with him is a series of misunderstandings, quarrels, fights, and hard reconciliations. By my own mistake, I fell into the trap of an unwanted relationship run by a creepy, possessive man. The next day, as I parted ways with Lucia on my way home, I experienced an amazing déjà vu. The same silver car was standing on the curb, passing by. I felt a strange rush of happiness. A young man I already knew got out of the car and said, "Good evening again. May I accompany you?" I confess that I liked him. He had the right appearance. Tall and trim brown hair, shrewd green eyes, and a gorgeous smile. Just a dream of my secret erotic fantasies. He walked next to me, and we talked to him nicely. It seemed that we knew each other for years. It turned out that his name was a little unusual, a Kim, or just Kim. We said goodbye not far from my house, and I noticed that I felt a little better after talking with him. At the end, he promised me that he would wait for me at the same place tomorrow, and I smiled at him simply and warmly. Our meetings with him became regular. The sympathy between us was growing every day, but I didn't give him any reason to think about anything more because of the situation in my life. I became more cheerful, and it was like I got wings of air. Yeah, I guess I fell in love. Of course, this was noticed by Kirill. He looked at me gloomily at times and almost did not talk to me, but at the same time he started to cook delicious meals and arrange romantic, silent evenings. He started to cook something with me at work, which pleasantly surprised me and even touched me a little bit. I noticed that my health had suddenly deteriorated. My stomach was rebelling, and I was hanging out in the bathroom a lot. And not long ago, when I ate a hot dog I bought near work, I was sick to my stomach. Immediately I thought, what if I'm pregnant? I immediately bought some pregnancy tests and fearfully took them. No, my fears were not justified. Still need to go to the doctor and find out what the problem is. Only pity it's not for another 10 days off. All right. Well, for now, we'll just have to stick with the medication and see if it goes away. Yesterday, the unexpected happened. Kim and I didn't hold back our tender feelings and kissed. It was the most amazing kiss of my life. We parted awkwardly, held hands until the last, and were afraid to look each other's eyes. And so today I dreamed of meeting him and thinking about the words that I would say to him tonight. My heart had been beating frantically and sweetly all day long, as if it were counting down the minutes. And I thought that I had to break up with my husband, try to explain everything to him, and stay at least as good acquaintances. These thoughts made my soul heavy again, and various unpleasant consequences that could come out of such a hard conversation. I wanted to be honest with those around me, but the truth is always the first thing that hurts. It was time for lunch, and I took out the vacuum jar that held what Kirill had prepared for me at work. They were juicy cutlets with gravy and mashed potatoes. I picked at the first cutlet with my fork thoughtfully, and grabbing a decent chunk of it with my hand, I popped it into my mouth. And suddenly, as I chewed happily, thinking about how he'd become a delicious cook, something crunched on my teeth. I spit it out on my hand and was horrified. There was a yellow, cracked human fingernail on my palm, with chunks of meat torn out at the base. I shuddered and immediately felt sick with disgust. I ran to the bathroom, cleared my stomach, rinsed my mouth with cold tap water for a long time, and sobbed hysterically. Lucy knocked on the door and asked in a restless voice what had happened to me, and my head was empty. I did not want to comprehend the situation. The sense of an unreal nightmare was driving me crazy. I tried to pull myself together and realized that I had to go home right away and pack my things. They let me go from work as soon as they saw my sorry state. I called a cab, and while we were driving, I called Cyril to arrange to get me to his place as soon as I got everything I needed from home. But his phone didn't answer. I thought he would see the missed calls and call back. I ran up the stairs, shaking my hands and struggling with the lock. And then as I entered the apartment, I was horrified. Kirill was home. He was standing in the shadows, his back to the wall, looking at me with crazy eyes. I jerked toward the front door, but before I could, he grabbed my arm and threw me to the floor. He raped me as roughly as he could. There was pain all over my body. Isn't that funny? I was brutally raped by my own husband. After all the abominations he had done to me, he grabbed me by my thick, terry hair and dragged me across the floor into the room. My clothes were torn and shreds of them were hanging off me. So silly were the beautiful suede boots on my feet, which I hadn't had time to take off. I was bleeding profusely from my privates. He roughly threw me on the floor near the radiator and took a prearranged object from the table. It was a dog's leather collar on a sturdy iron chain. Putting it on me, he hooked me to the battery. The doggy was on a magnetic key, which should not allow me to open it. All this time, I was in shock and did not even scream. But now crazy screams of pain and fear were coming out of me. Cyril punched me in the face and said, "You'll scream, bitch. Your death will come quickly, so instantaneously that you won't even have time to learn something very interesting." I did not recognize his voice. He became a different person, which I saw only now. I cut myself off on the floor screaming and stared at him in shock, still not fully believing the reality of what was happening. He was looking at me as if I were a piece of meat, as if thinking about what interesting dish to make of me. He uttered with terrible pleasure, "Did you really think I'd put up with your hunk? I'm going to sit back and watch you piss and build your relationship. You know me so little. I hate both of you, and I will destroy you for a long time to make you suffer and die, not only physically but mentally. In the meantime, sit here and agonize about what will happen to you next. I loved you so much." Cyril left the room, and I passed out so I wouldn't lose my mind. For days he came by my house just to change the water in the cat's bowl. Then today he asked me if I was hungry, and I gulped and nodded out of control. I was terribly hungry, my body began to eat its own internal juices, so that most of the day I was unconscious. He went out and came back in a couple of minutes with a plate, which smelled fragrant. He put the dish on the floor at my feet, and I was hysterical. On top of the flavorful meat studded with herbs were 2 eyeballs, one bright green, the other blue. Those were my cat Mickey's eyes. Cyril left medley and said, "Eat it, bitch, or it will get cold." Always hated that fluffy critter. And laughing medley, the tormentor left the room. I was flooded with tears and pushed aside the plate. But after a few hours, I couldn't take it. I ate everything but my cat's eyeballs. "I'm sorry, Mickey." The next day he came in, and after looking contentedly at the emptied plate, he said, "You know, honey, and that's just the beginning." A couple of days went by, and I began to lose my mind. I was incredibly hungry, and my body was stiff from being in one position. I wished then for salvation, then wished for a quick death. He looked into the room and assessed my miserable condition, and decided something for himself. It was reflected in his crazy eyes. "Honey, we need to save you right away. Today I have prepared a special dish for you. You will appreciate it with all your soul. I'm sure of it. Wait a little while and you'll be able to satisfy your hunger." He returned about half an hour later, holding a little dish in his hands. In silence, he knelt down beside me on his knees and placed the dish in front of him and said, "Bon appetit, darling." And immediately he took the lid off and I saw this. The face of Kim, so sweet to me, was looking at me. It was neatly sliced off and adorned with fried organs and parts of his body. Among them, the first thing I noticed the human heart. Such pain pierced me, and I think at that I seemed to have lost the rest of my sanity. I started screaming and sobbing. I started screaming and sobbing, wringing my hands. But I was kicked in the stomach and bent in half to silence. "Now, his heart belongs only to you. Isn't it beautiful?" The sadist was taking insane pleasure in what was happening. "Your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, darling, all for you. Maybe even if you completely empty your plate, I'll let you go. But only if you make it clean. You eat. While I tell you something, you know all those dishes I cooked for you were made with human fresh meat and organs. I tried so hard for you. Now you can't eat regular food. Now you're a natural monster, a cannibal. For you, sweetheart, I've been rounding up homeless people and junkies and cut them up in the garage. All for you, sweetheart." He was looking into my already insane eyes and smiled, and noticing that I was trying not to look at Kim's severed face, he took me by the hair and started poking my face into my plate. "Eat, dear. It's all yours now." The madman left and enjoyed himself. Then he pulled my head up, grabbed my hair, and began shoving parts of my dead lover into my mouth. Every piece that came into my mouth with brute force caused me to vomit, and I choked on all the abomination. and he kept repeating and repeating, "Bon appetit, darling." P.S. This story was told by a woman who died of crude disease, a disease caused by eating human meat. Then Marina was saved by an elderly neighbor from upstairs, who was very vigilant and suspected something wrong when she heard strange sounds and screams of pain. She called the law enforcement authorities, thereby saving the unfortunate girl's life. Kirill was tried, but found inadequate and placed in a strict psychiatric clinic. Thank you so much for your attention. Subscribe to the channel. See you soon.